Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lights on Data show. My name is George Firican. And in today's episode, this one is short to spark some lively conversations as we're going to dive into the world of cloud operations and DevOps and infrastructure management. I think it's a topic that's really critical to the success of modern businesses, but one that's often misunderstood or maybe misapplied. Cory O'Daniel, welcome to the Lights on Data show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. You're the CEO and co-founder of Massdriver, a company that's dedicated to improving the developer experience of cloud operations. Love it. I want to hear more about it. And now I want us to already start tackling this provocative topic, right? I think you called it DevOps is Bull Beep.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Oh,
And
I'm gonna have to bleep myself, huh?
yeah, so why it's time to acknowledge that DevOps fails business needs. I think you have some
Yeah.
strong opinions on this, right? And on how DevOps is in its current form and why it's not meeting the modern businesses. And I want to understand why you think a shift is necessary. But first, to kick things off, why are you saying that DevOps, again, in its current form, as it's traditionally practiced, it doesn't align with the business needs?
Well, I think that it aligns with business needs, but as I wrote, so I wrote an article for anybody who's not familiar. I wrote an article called "DevOps is Bull Bleep," and it's gotten very popular multiple times, and I know this because I get lots of emails and and social mentions when it does. The idea of DevOps is important, and I think it is very it is important to business, especially in the cloud, and
Mhm.
the idea is getting more important to do it well. I think the problem is, and why I call it bullcrap, is it ceases to have a definition, and that is a problem. Like that is the definition of bullcrap. Like it's bullcrap. Like nobody can explain what it is. You grab 10 engineers from operations
Mm.
to data to SRE to platform, and they're all going to give you 10 different descriptions, right? But
Mhm.
the essence of it is extremely important. And the goal of that article was, when we looked at the idea of DevOps when it was first kind of getting pitched and the word was getting solidified, the world, as far as how we operate software in the cloud, was very different. In fact, the cloud didn't really exist then, right? And it didn't exist then, right? In its form it is today. Like you had a couple of VMs or like some queues that maybe AWS offered, but there wasn't like what we have today: serverless,
Yeah,
containers,
right.
models, like everything else, right?
It evolved quite a bit. I mean, the
And
initial, I think, iteration of cloud was pretty much just lifting what he had on-prem and copy pasting it, if you will. It was sort of like a similar environment, but in another setting.
yeah, so the problem is, our when we think about writing software has mostly stayed the same. And give me a second here. Anybody who's like, what? Over the past like 60 years, like we've gotten new languages, but like it's like we accept requests, we have syntax, we have variables, we have functions. Like
Hmm.
yes, Node and TypeScript and Ruby and Go, they do look different, but the concepts are the same. But the way that we operate our software has changed 4 or 5 times pretty drastically since 2000, right? We had our own servers and data centers, and then we had VMs and like cloud 1.0, right? And then we had containers, and then serverless. Now serverless containers. Now we're seeing like MCP tools and LLMs, right? Like the way that we run our stuff has changed significantly over the years, and this is part of the reasons that I say that DevOps is bullcrap. Like we have not had 60 straight years of doing something one way, like we have with software, to get to these levels of expertise and efficiencies that we have in software and how we think about software. Every 5 years, the entire landscape of operations kind of changes. And why that's problematic is we're creating a lot more software developers today than ever before. There's more software developers on the planet than there are people in Australia. Like there's a lot of us. We're all
Wow.
over the place. But every year, the amount of people that have operations experiences declines
Hmm.
relative, right? And the reason why is you get operations experience by being in production
Hmm.
and running workloads, right?
Hmm.
And they don't teach that at university. They don't teach that in boot camps. And so why I think it's bullcrap is we have 10 different ways of defining it. People are just talking past each other when they're talking about DevOps for the most part.
Hmm.
People kind of ignored the maturity model. And then as the cloud became prevalent, not just as a way of operating our software, but how our software works, right? I'm no longer, running a cron job, I'm doing event-based architecture to do my jobs asynchronously, right? Like my software now is cloud, right? I'm consuming a service as a part of my application, not just running my application on top of it, right? And so we're getting a lot more cloud native. We don't have people that understand how to operate it at the rate that we know people that know how to put stuff onto it, right? Or develop the applications that are running it. So like we need to have more of this DevOps and operations experience to continue to make more and more companies online and more companies on the cloud. But we're not teaching that in the universities. We're not teaching that in boot camps. You get it from being in prod or being like a good apprentice program at a big organization. And so how do we get there? We have this widening gap of expertise between software developers and operations. How do we close that gap? And that's kind of the bull crap, is like we just keep talking about like, we'll do a little DevOps here, a little DevOps there. It's like, okay, but like we need more people on our teams to understand this stuff, or we need to scale the people that do.
Right. Because the cloud environment is becoming more complex as well with the amount of services that it's offering, and just to keep track of that is it's not easy. A lot of training needs to be.
It's crazy, right? It's funny. Like me and my co-founder now are like rewriting good portions of our application. We're moving to a self-hosted model. So we run as a SaaS today. Our number one requested feature is people want to run it on-prem. And we built our entire product on top of AWS. Like we have 27 AWS services that our product uses. It's running on Kubernetes and it uses Aurora. There's 27 things like in our code that is actually managed by AWS. And so we're rewriting all that to just be native and essentially a mono repo, so we can just lob it into other people's like VMs and whatnot, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I mean, it is prevalent.
Maybe going off topic then with these questions, but what do you find that a few companies are starting to kind of pull back from their cloud environments, preferring to be on-prem? I know some are, industry specific, and they have different regulations that they need to be on-prem and for security purposes and other privacy laws and things like that. But others, do you find, is it because they feel they're being pigeonholed into what these cloud services are offering, adding services, and then of course increasing the cost on things that they might not need, so they prefer to take that control back?
I think it's valid. I think the reality of what's happening is it's like the repatriation rate is like in single digit percents. Like the people that are doing it are very loud and famous people, so it sounds like everyone, like David Heinemeier Hansen's doing it, right? And it's like, but like I think that's one of the key things to, again, that makes DevOps bullcrap, is like it's become mostly a role, depending on who you talk to, that is today it's kind of entrenched in ticket ops. Developers need something, so they're tapping an ops person or opening a ticket and saying, hey, can you do this for me, right? And that's what the thing that makes it, that's just what operations was 20 years ago. We rebranded it. And there's other teams that are doing it well. So I think one of the things that's key to actually doing operations and DevOps well is being able to understand the constraints and needs of your workload, right? And so the thing that blows my mind a lot of times is you'll see companies jumping into the cloud super early. And dude, there's nothing wrong with a pass. Like go run on Heroku, go run your thing on Vercel until you have people loving what you've built, like, and you've reached that scale where you're like, I've outgrown Heroku for whatever reasons, whether it's scale or whether it's cost. Now you need to find something else, right? And that's where it's key to understand like how my workload works, because you could look at it and say, you know what? We could just run this in a data center. Now there's constraints there. As soon as you run it in a data center, is that a managed data center where they're taking care of the machines for you, or am I actually racking something? Because if I'm racking something, my developers just ground to a halt, because they are certainly not driving to Missouri and sticking stuff, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's like you have to have some level of operations to be able to start going into repatriation, putting things in a data center. But that's fine. There's a lot of data centers that are booting up that do a lot of the manual labor for you, and you kind of get, almost like if you were developing in the early 2000s and you were using things like SliceHost, where you got like this VM, like you're seeing more hardware and data center companies are offering that type of experience, where it's like, oh, I can just put my application into a VM. It's hardware, it's not on AWS, but then there's also constraints, like there's scaling constraints there. Okay, do I need a CDN? Maybe you don't. Like maybe you don't, right? I think this is one of the things that really sucks, is like there are all these like things, these words, these terms, these things that we're excited about. They're like, oh, my application needs that. I need sub-second latency and a global CDN. for my users that are mostly in the United States. Maybe you don't, and maybe you just be fine on a VM. But this is the real crux of it, is like understanding how our applications operate and like what the actual demands are of the business
Mm-hmm.
is something you have to understand before you know how to run the thing. You can't just make decisions and then find out what the business needs later. You need to be in tune with what the business needs, what it's expecting, and like how it plans to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a business today, we're in the US, but we're expanding to the EU or Asia. And it's like, okay, maybe I will need some more of these more complex things like Fastly or, CloudFront or whatever. Or maybe I don't, right? Like, so
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that's what's needed to start with. You need to understand what are those requirements, what are those business needs that you need to address, and set those constraints, because you don't want to go for everything. It reminds me of, sometimes you're seeing those job offers or the job descriptions for a software programmer, and they're asking, oh, we need you to know C++ and JavaScript and .NET and Python. And then when you actually get the job, well, first of all, a lot of people will be deterred, like, well, I don't have all of these. But then when you do get the job, you're like, oh no, we're just working .NET, and we just added the other
yeah,
stuff just because.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's another part. Is writing a good job requirements and job spec is hard,
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you also see like frequently you'll see like the litany of cloud services, right? Like, hey, do you know Python plus? And then it's like just like the entire AWS catalog, and it's like that is too much to put in a single person's head. Like that's crazy, right? And even if you have that person has that all in their head, that's scary as a business. That's a small bus factor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or that
Mm-hmm.
person's a bottleneck on that team because they might be the sole source of that knowledge. Getting that entire team up to speed on that same list of services is going to slow your cadence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah.
Yeah. So then that traditional DevOps approach, how would you recommend that it would change? Is it to expand on its current requirements and needs, or to have separate streams for it, maybe give it different names?
That one right there at the end, and that's what I was trying to get to. I think that's one of the things that like my writing style. I write a bit tempered and hot, but my point, if you read that post, is I talk about like the couple different traditional ways how people see DevOps. Is it a team? Is it a role? Is it a set of practices? Right? And it's funny when and that's part of the problem with it, is like people define it different ways. So if you read the blog post, like what I'm getting at is we need this, whatever it is, we need it. We need better operations. We need more security, more compliance, and we need to be able to handle global scale when our applications get there.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
how do we do that? Because we don't have enough ops people. There's just not enough
Right.
people that understand the cloud or even data centers to do this routine. So how do you do it? And my point in the article is, when you talk to somebody who is a true, like, original term DevOps, they watched the old Flickr video and they're like, yeah, ride or die, like we're going to do it. I don't think that's the way. I think it was the way. I think it made sense when you're like, hey, we're going to have the dev team and the ops team, and they're going to be in harmony and they're going to work well together.
Mm.
That worked when the world was simple. But as you get to the cloud and you get to infrastructure automation and infrastructure as code and policy tooling, and you've reached some massive scale, it starts to get really hard for an operations team, especially when there's 20 of them, to kind of fit in well with the 3,000 software developers they're serving, right? And so that harmony is hard to make happen. And so that operations team has to change, right? Again, some people will say a DevOps team. That's a weird word for me, right? Like this operations team, the person is understanding how to operate our networks, secure our things, et cetera. How do they serve 3,000 people? How do they serve a massive number of engineers larger than them? You have to start to adopt like the top tier of like old DevOps, like DevOps maturity model. Like you have to start moving towards platform engineering. You have to figure out how you take those 20 people and you scale them to be able to serve the 3,000 engineers that they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting back to creating abstractions for those developers. So developers shouldn't have to learn all the ins and outs of how an individual AWS service works and how it operates, right? Two different things. How do I interact with it with my software, and how do I run it under the hood, right? They shouldn't have to worry about that. So it's about creating those abstractions for them, and the operations team starting to adopt more mature practices and become a software team themselves, right? And some people call this platform engineering. Some people call this really good DevOps. And my point with the article was, at the time that I wrote it, and I don't necessarily believe this as much anymore, but at the time, like platform engineering was such a hot term, and it still is. I saw the marketing opportunity of that in organizations. And we had that 15 years ago when DevOps first came out. Everybody's like, oh my God, like this is going to make our teams more efficient. And then we just fucking squandered it. Sorry, beep. Right. We just squandered it. And like everybody had their own definition. And so like when I saw this kind of coming up, I was like, it's becoming a more and more popular term. People are starting to make platform teams. This is the time that we can actually start to get those good DevOps practices and lean on the fact that like we have this new term that stakeholders outside of the engineering org are using, right? And so it's like, okay, if a stakeholder comes along, it's like, we need this operations team to be more efficient. How do we scale compliance and security across an org of 3,000 software developers? And it's like, well, we actually do platform engineering. We do top tier level DevOps maturity model. We're going to do the right thing. And I really think it was naming, but I think that unfortunately now 3 years later, we have definitely landed right back in the land of when you see somebody who's a platform engineer, you don't know what they do. And I think we've unfortunately gotten to the point where it's just been, people haven't done it well. They haven't communicated it to their businesses well. We haven't socialized it well on the internet. And now when you meet somebody who's a platform engineer, they might have the exact same job as an SRE, which might have the exact same job as a DevOps engineer, which might be the exact same job as an operations engineer. And so you just don't know anymore.
Yeah.
But I think for a business that has an operations team where you're trying to scale it, saying, should I have all the developers learn the operations stuff? That's not the answer if you're in the cloud. That you're going to slow your developers to a halt. Nobody's going to have any understanding of what's going on.
Right.
It's taking that operations team and saying, okay, how do we build software around their knowledge with abstractions that work for the developers so the developers can get what they want without learning everything that this team does and without constantly tapping on their shoulders and asking them to do stuff for them.
Tell me a little bit about Massdriver, how it's aiding that, how it's able to do DevOps without the red tape.
Yeah. So we're designed for teams that are at a bit more scale. So if you're a startup, you're early stage, go enjoy Heroku, go enjoy Vercel. Like, just focus on what you're building. Please, for the love of God, focus on what you're building and do a good job at it. And then come talk to me in like 2 years. But when you're at scale, right? So what starts to happen is when you start to look for like platform tools, the thing that sucks about being on an operations team is you are typically outnumbered and they're almost always underwater. And so when you get to the point where, you know, the VP of engineering is like, we got to figure out how to make this team more efficient. It's like, okay, well, just give them a lot more budget. You got 3,000 software developers. You only got 20 of these ops people. If you had 1,500 of them, you wouldn't have a problem, right? But that budget's not realistic because an operations person doesn't produce a product that the customer sees and buys. They produce a product that engineers build on that customers see and buy, right? And so we got to get a lot of efficiency out of an extremely large team that typically struggles with budget. A lot of times the entire cloud budget falls on them. Engineers are building databases, but it's the operations team's budget. And so hiring more people on that team or starting to put software developers on that team is a lengthy process. And there's team, when you look at Google, you look at Facebook, they did it. They're doing great, but they also have all the money in the world. So when you're looking at somebody who's like Fortune 1000 and you're like, hey, you just got to build a crack team of engineers to build your own platform team, like it could take you months to even start staffing that team, let alone the amount of time it's going to take to start building it, right?
You don't have the luxury to spend that much time.
Yeah. And then when you look at a lot of the products in the space, and this is kind of where we got the idea for Massdriver, they ask that operations team to reskill, which is, as an operations engineer, sucks. Like, I don't like, hey, you want to get more out of you, you just got to learn TypeScript. And it's like, I don't have time to do that. Like, I've got 3,000 developers asking me for stuff all day long. I've got systems I got to support. I need to get more out of myself now without learning anything new. And so that's kind of the concept behind Massdriver. Our goal is to be able to deliver self-service to your engineers with essentially pre-compliant infrastructure. They don't have to go through all this compliance nightmare stuff. Like, it is an abstraction level that works for them. It meets all of your company's non-negotiables, compliance and security requirements. And the way it works for your operations engineers is it just works with the tools they already know. So they probably know Terraform or OpenTofu or one of the companies behind OpenTofu, Helm, Puppet, Ansible, whatever the tool stack is that operations team use. What Massdriver does is it takes that code that they're writing and it essentially turns it into platform as a service for their developers. So I write some Terraform. I'm like, hey, here's some Terraform. This is how we manage Aurora databases on AWS. For compliance, we use OPA, and here's all of our compliance scripts. I essentially just pack that into this concept that we call a bundle. It takes your infrastructure as code and all of your policy tooling, makes it a single artifact, and then when you publish it to essentially our registry, which is something like an NPM registry or any package registry, that shows up in a UI now for developers, and they diagram the infrastructure they want. So instead of coming and asking you for something, I say, hey, I need a database. I drag it out, and it's effectively Terraform and the policy code. I don't have to ask you to make me the database. I don't have to open a PR and say, hey, does this pass compliance? All of that tooling is packed into that concept we call a bundle. And when they drag it onto the canvas, they've a couple of drop downs there, they fill out. It's effectively the Terraform inputs. They hit deploy, all the provisioning is done. And so now, like thinking again about the scale of your operations team, I have now, as an operations person, said, hey, my expertise is packed into this bundle, the infrastructure and the policy. You can just take it when you want it. You don't have to ask me if it's compliant or secure. Like that's all baked into it. And now day two, and this is the part that sucks. Day two is forever in operations. We think about it, we deploy it, now we maintain it. The thing that sucks about self-service in many of these platforms is, as a developer, it's great. I can deploy whatever I want. Something's broken, I'm going to go ask the ops team for help. Now, as an ops person, you're walking in 3 months later and you're like, so what have you guys built? Right? Like, what have you built? Like, I don't know what you've built. But in Massdriver, it's a diagram. So you log in as the operations person. I literally see the network and infrastructure architecture of your application. And I know that every single one of those boxes that are connected together backs out to a Terraform module or a Helm chart that somebody on my team wrote. And so I immediately have this literal, like visible graph context of what you've done and how things are connected. I'm not looking at a database and saying, how many applications are accessing this? I'm looking at the database and I see there's 3 applications with a line drawn through it. And that line manages the credentials. It manages the firewall rules. So I know, it's going through the 5432 port to get to Postgres because I can see this line. It's these 2 applications, right? And so we're just trying to give as much of that time back to the operations engineer by letting them package up their expertise, letting their developers just kind of grab it and go. And nobody has to learn anything new. Developers already know how to diagram stuff. Right. Operations teams already know how to write Terraform.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that would save so much time as well. And it has so many other implications, other use cases to keep track of those regulations, to be nimble when there's a change in requirements and know where it affects your infrastructure and what to spin off there. Great. What would you say it's one of the most important change that you think would need to happen then in the DevOps world, that to truly enable businesses to grow and to innovate?
I think one of the biggest things, and this is crazy. So if you're an operations engineer or DevOps engineer, SRE, or whatever your company calls you, and you hear this, what I'm about to say, it's going to sound crazy. People need to start adopting infrastructure as code. And like when you're in the space and when you're in the cloud, that just seems so like, yeah, of course people do this, but they don't. Like big surveys from Status CD report to Dora, it's like 30% of companies in the cloud are even doing infrastructure as code, which means people are either just making stuff from the AWS CLI or they're clicking around in the AWS console, which means you have no bearing if it's compliant, secure, reproducible. In a disaster recovery scenario, how do we bring this all back up? A lot more operations engineers need more time just so they can start learning how to start to automate this stuff. And it sucks because, again, this is a team that is absolutely overwhelmed with work in any given organization you meet. But I think that's the number one key is like we as a community of engineers, like we are not pushing that forward, and it's definitely stagnated over the past few years. That 30% number has stayed pretty consistent over the past 4 or 5 years. And it's just like when you look at an org and they're like, we're not doing infrastructure as code. It's like that. I don't know how the CISO is not having a heart attack, right? So I think that's one of the key things. And, what sucks is a lot of these tools are also very much, well, until OpenTofu, which is a fork of HashiCorp Terraform, every single one of these tools that you look at for managing the cloud was directly tied to VC-backed money. right? And so universities, it's hard for them to teach it because it's like, oh, this is Puppet's product, right? This is HashiCorp's product. It's not like I'm teaching you C, or it's not like I'm teaching you Node.js. It's like I'm teaching you a very specific vendor's product, which is hard to put in the syllabus because you don't know if that vendor is going to be there in a few years, right? And then on the other side of it, it's managing cloud, which now you're specifically teaching somebody AWS. So I think one of the things that I would love to see more of is, as we start to see things like Kubernetes. I know there's a thing that causes people to panic, but Kubernetes does have something very beautiful to it. And that is that once you understand it pretty much wherever it's running, right? To me, it is the Linux of the cloud. Like, it is one over the rest of the orchestrators. And I think that it's prevalent enough that you can start teaching it in universities, and you can teach the tools that manage it, things like Helm, right? And start getting that education earlier into, universities or boot camps or whatever, so that these people that are writing software start to have a taste of what it's like to operate that software in a real world environment versus, today they're just kind of running on their machine. And how do I go from localhost 3000 to, running this on AWS? And it's a massive leap. So I think that's one of the things that I think could be really key as an industry to start leaning into, now that we have a product that isn't necessarily tied to, a public company or, some sort of VC backed company.
Thank you, Cory. Thanks for putting the lights on DevOps. And I do encourage everybody to check out Massdriver.cloud, find out more, and please, get in touch with Cory too, and follow him on LinkedIn and check out his article.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cory. Keep in touch.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, everyone.